Hi, and welcome to Hannah's Writers Podcast. My name's Charlotte, and I work as a Year 2 teacher in a primary school in London. If you haven't heard any podcasts from Hannah's Writers before, then have a listen on their YouTube and Spotify channels. You can search for them on both websites, and you can start listening to the podcasts that they have available. This podcast is an author spotlight on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He was an author born on May 22nd in 1859 in Edinburgh, Scotland, and then died on July the 7th in 1930. His most famous works, of course, are his amazing stories about a very famous detective, Sherlock Holmes. Now, before I start talking about his wonderful stories about the infamous detective, I'm going to talk a little bit about Sir Arthur himself. So, Sir Arthur was born in Scotland, as I mentioned earlier, and he was born one of 10 children in his family, and he led a very interesting life. Writing was not actually his first choice for a choice in job role. It wasn't the first thing that he wanted to do. He was actually very interested in science, and as he was growing up, he went to Edinburgh University and went to study and train to be a doctor there. He passed and he gained his doctor's degree from Edinburgh University in 1881, and then he went on to work as a surgeon. Now, his life was very interesting. As he was working as a surgeon, at some point he got asked to work as a medical officer on a boat steamer. There's not very much information about why he went to work as a medical officer on a boat steamer, but he did. So there must have been a reason for him. Maybe he wanted to travel the world. At that time, boats were very new, and traveling the world was also something very new and exciting. So maybe he wanted to get out of the UK, leave Scotland, and spend his time traveling and visiting different countries. So the boat steamer was actually traveling between Liverpool and West Africa, and it was probably during this time, while he was traveling abroad, that he experienced many different events, which he would soon write about in his stories with Sherlock Holmes and his companion, Dr. Watson, and of course included all the other characters that appear in the Sherlock Holmes stories. So after his trip, when he came back to the UK, he decided to stay in Portsmouth. And while he was there, he spent his time working again as a doctor. But then he also began writing his stories. And I'm not going to say he started writing Sherlock Holmes and became a massive hit. He actually wrote lots of short stories about different characters and was even having trouble and difficulty publishing his stories because he found that it was actually quite hard for his books to become popular. It was hard for his stories to become widely known. So he did it probably as a side job at that time and probably because he loved writing. It wasn't until he started writing about a particular character, Sherlock Holmes, and his companion Dr. Watson, when he suddenly became a big hit with everyday people and people who wanted to read his stories about this character. People wanted to read more of these kind of things because they found it interesting and they had a developing love for his stories about Sherlock. So one of his very first stories about Sherlock Holmes and his friend Dr. Watson is called A Study in Scarlet. And now this short story actually made its debut in 1887, and it was published in Beeton's Christmas Annual. Now, Beeton's Christmas Annual was a British paperback magazine, and it was printed yearly between 1860 and 1898. So it was about 20 years down the line that this had been published, and he managed to get his stories published in there. The story soon became very popular and was soon very successful. And that just encouraged Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to write more stories about Sherlock Holmes. He'd finally hit upon a character that people loved and people wanted to read about. And so then this has led to him writing many, many other famous stories that are still being read about Sherlock Holmes today. Now, if you haven't read any of his stories about Sherlock Holmes, I'm going to list the different titles below so you can check and listen out for the ones that you may have heard, or if you haven't had a chance to read them, you can find them online and go and read them. So the novels he wrote for Sherlock Holmes, the book titles include The Silent the Four, The Hounds of Baskervilles, The Valley of Fear. And those were three significant books. I think The Hounds of the Baskervilles is quite popular, and it was one of the ones that is widely known today. He also wrote about 56 short stories based on Sherlock and Watson, and they were collated into 5 different books. And those books are called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, His Last Bow, and The Case Book of Sherlock Holmes. Now, all of his stories have an element of mystery, a bit of crime, drama, it's a bit of a thriller, and Sherlock was always shown as a very capable and clever character, and he was always able to figure out who done it or who did it, what had actually happened, because sometimes it wasn't very clear, and he was also able to give the whole explanation of how things had happened and how things had played out. And actually, I think that was probably one of the reasons why Sherlock Holmes and his stories and the mysteries that he solved was probably such a popular thing. At that time, remember, people were not very sure about reading things. They read classics like William Shakespeare, probably. They read classics like Beowulf. They probably read stories that were more simple. If you think about it, at that time in 1881 or in the 1890s, people were not sure about characters like this. Maybe there was a famous detective novel, but they hadn't been written in this way. Sherlock Holmes had been written as a very particular type of character. So it was very probably refreshing for people to read a story about a quirky kind of guy. And then read about how he solved the mysteries in his own special way. So this month it is my pleasure to talk about the wonderful novelist and give credit to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for his very clever and witty writing. And it is because of his stories that throughout the years since he's written them, that there have been many television shows and movies created and based off of this infamous detective, Sherlock Holmes. Nowadays, as well, you always see these kind of clever characters pop up, from TV shows to books to characters in movies. There's always a kind of degree where people want to show how clever other people are, and they want to show it off in a very fun way. If you've ever seen the movie Seven, I think it was Seven, that was quite a good one. Or if you've seen Now You See Me, or Catch Me If You Can, um, these kind of movies are kind of mysteries. Who did it? What happened? And they give a character that's clever, maybe clever, too clever for their own good. And they kind of work out mysteries and solve crime, and they try to get into the minds of other criminals. But they're always doing it for good. They always want to solve a mystery. They always want to help other people who have, been tragically involved in a story, and they want to find out. Sometimes the characters just want to find out for themselves. They don't really want to. They don't really care about the mystery of who had done it. They just want to figure out who. They just want to figure out why, or they want to figure out how. Otherwise, it just bugs them, and they just can never go through their life without nitpicking at things, finding out details, and working things out. So I'm not going to go through every TV series that has been created. However, the most recent retellings of Sherlock himself were in 2010, and this is when the BBC broadcast a television series with Benedict Cumberbatch, and Benedict starred as the brilliant detective Sherlock Holmes. Martin Freeman starred as the infamous Dr. Watson. Mark Gatiss was Sherlock's brother, Mycroft Holmes, and Andrew Scott became his favourite evil counterpart, Jim Moriarty. There've also been movies. In 2009 and 2011, the standalone movie Robert Downey Jr. starred as Sherlock Holmes, and he was joined with Jude Law, who played the wonderful Dr. Watson in the movie. So these kind of things, again, because of Sir Arthur Conan's writing, because of his stories, he has now become a worldwide known author. And remember, writing wasn't his first love. Writing wasn't his first passion. It was something that he did as a side after he came back from traveling, after he came back from living life, and he's basically written about some life experiences. Of course, he's probably jazzed it up, but maybe the characters that he writes about in his stories were characters that he met, people that he based off personality traits from. Or maybe he did meet a Sherlock Holmes himself, and he was the actual Dr. Watson in his own actual stories. I don't know, there's quite a lot that you could read into it. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. The only thing to know is that we can only guess. Then that's it for this podcast. So thank you very much for listening in. I hope that if you've enjoyed listening to it, it might have inspired you to read some of the Sherlock Holmes books. Maybe you're encouraged to go and find a book or two on eBay or Amazon. Maybe get one from the library and have a good read. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast and you would like to listen to more, then please like and subscribe to Hanaz Writers YouTube and Spotify channels. And if you are interested in becoming a published author yourself, then visit Hanaz Writers website and sign up. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, bye!
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and share. It really helps us out and keeps the content coming. Want to rock some awesome merch? Check out our online store, TikTok shop, or eBay page for exclusive Hanaz Writers gear. Do not forget to stay connected. Links to our social profiles can be found down below in the description. Got a brilliant idea you'd love to publish? We'd love to hear from you. Email us or visit our website at https://hanazwriters.org for all the details on how to get started. Thanks for watching and supporting Hanaz Writers. We hope to see you again soon.